Ho, ho, ho. Just like that, folks. Just like that, the Vancouver Canucks have a much better blue line than the Edmonton Oilers. Just like that. It is an episode of Canucks Conversation. A Tuesday edition of Canucks Conversation is brought to you by our friends over at Greta, the home of our electric watch parties during the season and our off-season chill spot at this time of year. Make Greta your spot to eat, drink, and play this summer. I said it last week. I'll say it again. Been looking around at the watch party dates that we might do for this upcoming season. There's a lot of good matchups, like just good matchups to watch this season with the Vancouver Canucks. Lots of different storylines to follow, but the one we're following today is that offer sheets are back, and they are back with a bang this morning. We all woke up to the news. Well, maybe some of you were awake before us, but we saw the news whenever you saw it, that the St. Louis Blues have extended offer sheets to two Edmonton Oilers restricted free agents, Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg. 2 years at $2.29 million for Holloway, the forward, obviously. $4.58 million, again, at 2 years for Philip Broberg, the defenseman. An overpay. Longtime listeners of this show will know Chris Faber defiantly called Philip Broberg a bust. I think it is before his draft, after the draft, and I think Faber still stands by that. But Philip Broberg, not well loved on this show, but that is an overpay for Philip Broberg, it looks like. So now the Oilers are left with the decision. They have a week to decide if they're going to match the contract. If they match it, that's the player's contract. Players then can't be traded for one whole year. If Edmonton chooses not to match, they'll receive a third-round pick for Holloway and a second-round pick for Broberg. So it's the topic of our poll question. Tyler Yaremchuk of Oilers Nation is going to join us in just a few moments here, and we're going to talk to him all about this. But this is a complicated situation. It makes the Edmonton Oilers offseason situation even more complicated than it was to begin with.
Absolutely. And before we even get to the analysis part of it, I just love the chaos and the drama that happens with the offer sheets. All 30 other fan bases, well, I should say 31, because the only upset one are probably Oilers fans, love these storylines, especially in the middle of August, especially because earlier in the day, what was it, 7 hours before, we got news that the Blues had reacquired their own second-round pick from the Penguins, because in offer sheets, you can only use your own draft picks. So what seemed like a nothing, like scratch your head type of trade back then was clearly like multiple dominoes sort of lining up there. I think this is really intelligently structured by the Blues, because with offer sheets, I think the mistake people make is they always want to focus on the star franchise quality players. But as we saw with Carolina back in the day, matching the Sebastian Aho offer sheet, you're just not going to be able to pry a franchise quality player away. It's just too important for the teams to retain those players. I think the middle ground where you can actually pry the player realistically away are when you have talented young players on cap-strapped contenders, because these RFAs, especially the ones that don't have arbitration rights, like Broberg, like Holloway, the Oilers probably were betting that, hey, these guys don't have much leverage. We can just drag this out late into the summer and then really squeeze them at super inexpensive costs. That's where the Blues come in and target not just one, but two of them together. And again, this is another reason why it's pretty intelligently structured, because Holloway's deal at just over 2.2 is the more reasonable one to match, but Broberg plays the position where the Oilers desperately need help. So the Oilers kind of have to decide here, and this is going to be the debate, is do we pick the player on the more reasonable contract, but we're already deep on wingers? So is that worth it? Or are we going to go out and match Broberg, where we're going to have to overpay on the cap hit that he's on now?
There's so many different factors to think about, right? Like there's so many different things to look at, because when we look at the Oilers defense group, it looks like Broberg's going to be a big part of that. They lost Vincent Desharnais. Obviously, he's now a Vancouver Canuck, but like, that's the thing I'm going to be curious when we talk to Tyler is how do the Oilers navigate this? Because purely looking at the numbers, it's like you said, Harm, you would look at that and say, okay, well, obviously Dylan Holloway is the one you keep. Take the second round pick for Philip Broberg. But like the Oilers are trying to compete next year. The Oilers need to ice a competitive roster next year, and they need an NHL caliber defense group. So it's going to be interesting to see how they navigate it. Let's bring them in. Let's bring in Tyler Yaremchuk, who's brought to you by the Bad for Baseball podcast. Wow. Nick Pallalog and Adam Peddle host Bad for Baseball, the most unapologetic, in-your-face baseball podcast that delivers weekly unfiltered takes on the good and the bad around MLB and the world of baseball. Since 2020, Nick and Adam have been entertaining Blue Jays fans with their commentary and live streams on their YouTube channel, Blue Jays Today, but their love of baseball goes much deeper than just one team, and after the Shohei Ohtani free agency drama, the guys knew they needed an outlet to talk ball outside of their hometown team. New episodes of Bad for Baseball drop every Monday and Thursday on their Bad for Baseball YouTube channel or wherever you stream your podcasts. Another guy who's all over the place on YouTube and wherever you stream your podcast is Tyler Yaremchuk. Tyler joins us now. I was on his show yesterday. Tyler, no one saw this coming, right? Like you guys weren't doing previews about offer sheets yesterday, were you?
No, we weren't. The one thing, and I know Frank had speculated about it on the DFO rundown, and we did sit there at different points early in the offseason, and we're like, boy, if a team like Calgary, say, really wanted to put the screws to the Edmonton Oilers, like offer sheeting Holloway and Broberg together as one, we did look at that as like, if someone wanted to do it, they could easily have those two players. And I'm honestly surprised that the Blues didn't step up and go a little bit more money even to try grab these guys. But anyways, we speculated on it a little bit, but at the end of the day, there's been 2 offer sheets in the last 10 years of the NHL, and both of them are between 2 teams that were feuding back and forth. Like, we saw it as like, oh man, if a GM was smart, they'd go do this, but it was just like, it's the NHL. No one ever does offer sheets, so the Oilers probably don't need to be all that worried about it, which is what makes it so surprising.
How would you approach this if you were in the Oilers' shoes? Would you be looking at trying to offload a contract like Cody Ceci and trying to match both players? Do you think that's even a realistic possibility? How would you handle this?
It's really, really tough. And you guys touched on it off the jump. Like, Dylan Holloway is the more proven player. He's played more games in the NHL. He's had more success at the NHL level. Philip Broberg is playing the more important position. Philip Broberg, though, is on the worst contract now out of the two of them. Like, everyone likes to just pencil in Philip Broberg as a top 4 D-man, and we've been doing it in Edmonton all summer, but I've always said it's a massive risk. He did it for 10 games in the Stanley Cup playoffs, and outside of that, we've never even really seen Philip Broberg flourish as a third-pairing defenseman, never mind as a second-pairing defenseman playing on his offside, the right side, which is what the Oilers might need him to do. So, who's the better, more proven player? It's Holloway. Who plays the position of a greater need? It's Broberg. If you look at it like that in a vacuum, you go, okay, well, keep the guy who plays the more important position and whose upside could be more significant for you in the long run in Broberg. But then you sit there and go, boy, $4.5 million for 2 years. And it's not just that. What are your qualifying offers going to have to be to him afterwards? It's basically like signing him for 4.5 for 2 years and then basically saying, well, by year 3, he's going to have to be a $5 million defenseman for us, or we're going to have to let him walk. Like, there's so many wrinkles that make this so complicated. Can they trade a guy like Cody Ceci? There's a part of me that says yes. Frank seems to think yes. But also, if you could snap your fingers and trade Cody Ceci, why would you have not done that already in the summer is kind of the other debate you could have with that. So many different ways to go. The other argument that people keep saying is, well, if you have Cody Ceci at 3.25, you'd much rather have Philip Broberg at 4.5 million. And my counter argument to that is, just because one guy's contract sucks doesn't mean you just sign up for another contract that sucks. Like, part of getting out from under Ceci would be to have fewer crappy contracts on the books, not to just bring in another one, which Philip Broberg's, it might turn out great. It could be December and he's struggling with the workload of 20 plus minutes a night, 3-4 times a week, and he's back on the third pairing and he's, in way above his head. Like, it's so hard to predict. So on one hand, it's like, don't sign up for the risk. On the other hand, it's like, don't let good young players walk away for way less than they're worth it. It's just so much.
Tyler, there's so many different avenues we could go down here, but you kind of brought it up that the offer sheet is basically used between teams that are feuding. Is there some fight between the Blues and Oilers that we don't know, or is this St. Louis throwing the first punch?
Well, Peter Chiarelli works in their front office, so there's that, right? Like, there was a point where there was that connection. Doug Armstrong and Ken Holland are close. I saw some Oilers fans on Twitter being like, this is Ken Holland flipping the bird to Jeff Jackson in the Oilers front office for not making him a better offer to be the president of hockey operations and bringing in a GM below him, because I know there was some talk about that. But I don't know. I don't think this is like a personal feud between the two sides. I just think it's St. Louis sitting there going, hey, this is a good chance to get one or maybe two good young players and asset-wise pay under market value. And with the Torrey Krug situation, like, they have the LTIR space, so why not take a swing at it?
Okay,
Well,
well, it's a feud now. So sorry, Harm. What's the Oilers comeback? Are there any RFAs on the Blues next year that they can offer sheet? Like, what are we looking at here? Tell me the Oilers punch. What are they going to do? They're
Oh,
not going to sit there and take that.
well, the one obvious punch would be next summer when he's eligible. He's in the same situation Dylan Holloway is. It's Jake Neighbors, who played his junior hockey in Edmonton. He's an
Oh,
Alberta boy.
baby.
He was the captain of the Edmonton Oil Kings. Oilers fans are already talking. July 1 next year, you hammer Jake Neighbors with an offer sheet. But also, when Carolina went down that path with the Retribution, you could argue it didn't really work out all that well for them. Like, they ended up having a pretty expensive Jesperi Kotkaniemi. He's a fine player in my books, but now he signed that long-term deal. It's kind of like, I don't know if that really ended up being worth all of the work. The other thing too is, like you said in the intro, Harm, it takes a very unique circumstance for this thing to work, right? You need a cap strap team who has really probably two young players who you can pit them against each other within their own organization. And you yourself have to have the assets, which I doubt the Oilers would have the assets to do an offer sheet. And you yourself have to have more cap space than the other team to make an offer that actually makes them squirm. So like next summer, are the Oilers just going to be like, yeah, sure, $6.5 million for Jake Neighbors because we want to stick it to the Blues? The Blues would probably sit there and be like, yeah, we'll take a couple first round picks. Like, thank you very much. So I don't think the Oilers need to turn this into any sort of offer sheet back and forth or anything like that. The best way to get retribution is to shrug and say, whatever, teams are scared of us. They're trying to take us down, and we're just going to let our play on the ice next year speak for itself.
I'm sure Doug Armstrong also didn't mind because Stan Bowman managing all those Hawks teams and the Blues and Blackhawks being rivals back in the day. I'm sure Doug Armstrong didn't mind sticking it to Stan Bowman from that perspective too. I was curious, how does Evander Kane's, and this is sort of related, but also kind of unrelated, what's the future for Evander Kane? There were reports that came out today, I believe, from Ryan Rishaug saying that he's expected to have surgery, going to potentially miss several months. Is he going to land on LTIR? And do you expect that he could be there for the entire season? And what are the different scenarios for how that could potentially affect this decision that the Oilers have with their offer sheets?
It's absolutely massive. I mean, if you can get that $5 million in LTIR relief, and Rishaug said today, there's a thought, I don't want to misquote him, but it was the timeline of several months. Okay, if Evander Kane is going to try, it's the Kucherov thing, right? Oh, he's trying to rehab it over the summer. And then, oh, look at that. October 1st, Evander Kane needs surgery. He's out 7 months, and it lines up right in the playoffs. Like, it feels like that's the way this is trending. And I mean, you guys know in Vancouver, like there's certain media members that when they say something, you kind of like raise an eyebrow and go like, okay, they don't usually pipe up with this kind of stuff. And for me, it was when Bob Stauffer last week tweeted out that, Evander Kane unlikely to be ready for the start of the season. Surgery is being contemplated. And it's like, okay, if Bob Stauffer, a guy who works for the organization, is tweeting that out and the Oilers official account is retweeting it, like, probably a pretty good sign that the organization has some sort of an idea of how this is going to play out. You got to be careful because you can't head into the season with Kane on LTIR and be like, well, he's coming back in January and we'll just deal with it then, because that's a recipe for disaster. But I do think the expectation is Kane will be on LTIR. The only problem is if you bring in Broberg, or you match for Broberg and you match for Holloway, you can get cap compliant for opening night by sending like 3 guys down on waivers. But then you're running the whole season with 12 forwards, 6 defensemen, and 2 goalies on your roster. Like, that's not exactly a great idea either. So I do think the way out of this, if they want to keep both young players, is you match them, you trade Cody Ceci. You're probably still running with a bit of a skeleton roster at that point. Maybe you can only have 1 extra defenseman carried with you throughout the regular season. And you're probably behind the scenes, you probably have a pretty good idea with Evander Kane kind of going like, wink, you're good to not play till, April 12th. Yeah, okay, you're good. Sounds good to us. So, if any player is going to kind of put their hand up and be like, I'm okay with just collecting my check and hanging out while I recover from surgery and not rushing back, it's probably going to be Evander Kane.
Tyler, just looking at the Oilers blue line here, like, we were talking on your show yesterday about how great free agency was, right? And they go out and get a couple forwards that we both really like, Jeff Skinner, Victor Arvidsson. Is there any sense of, I don't want to use the word regret, but maybe you're thinking to yourself a little bit like, this defense core needs help. And if we're going to have to lose Philip Broberg, it really needs help.
For me, there's a little bit of looking at it like, okay, did you need Jeff Skinner, right? He's not going to get power play time here. He's a really good 5v5 scorer. I'm not saying he's not a really nice fit with this team even, but could you have just gone into next year with the top six that was Nugent Hopkins, McDavid, Hyman, Holloway, Draisaitl, and then on the right side, you could still have signed Victor Arvidsson, and then your third line, Henrique with Janmark and Brown. When Kane comes back from LTIR, he slots in there nice. Like, without Skinner, they still would have had a pretty solid forward group. And with McDavid and Draisaitl, they're always going to score goals. Like, production's never going to be an issue for them. There's a little bit for me, and it's all in hindsight because in the moment you loved it and in the moment it made a ton of sense. But in hindsight, it's like, yeah, okay, maybe you should have just backed off the Jeff Skinner thing and seen who was available, who's the best right shot available defenseman you could have gotten to, again, lessen the expectations on Broberg, because again, the Oilers, whether they have him or not, like if they match this, he's coming into next season and he has to be a 20 to 22 minute a night right side defenseman who is a left shot, and he's got to do that on a nightly basis. So it was a massive risk going into the blue line or going into the season with this blue line, and now it's a massive risk whether you do or don't match this offer sheet to Philip Broberg, because there's a chance, and I know you love him, Quads, but Troy Stecher might be playing top 4 minutes on opening night for the Oilers, and
You'll be
they're
fine.
a Stanley Cup contender. They're top of the odds board. A Stanley Cup caliber team doesn't have Troy Stecher in their top 4.
Okay, that's fine. You added that caveat because I was going to say Canucks have had Troy Stecher in the top 4 many a times, and he was great. He was great back in the day. Okay, that's fair.
Tyler, I had one more for you. When I look at this blue line, Darnell Nurse over the years has been quite volatile, right? He's had some years where he's playing like a legit number 2-3 defenseman, and then he has other moments, like especially in these playoffs, where he massively struggles. And it feels like if he can play closer to his potential, that would maybe go a long way in helping Edmonton's blue line play to a competent level. What are the odds that you think Nurse can get back to being a legitimately reliable top 4 defenseman? And how much of it do you think is if the Oilers can just go out and find one more defenseman that can maybe play with him, that would be the key to getting that more consistent, productive version of Nurse?
I do think part of it is partner dependent. Like, again, you look at last year, the results he got with Philip Broberg were actually pretty good. And it was kind of like, okay, look, Philip Broberg can skate. He's a breakout machine. He very rarely made mistakes getting the puck out of his own end. And you saw his results with Darnell Nurse get better versus when he was with Vincent Desharnais, who doesn't move the puck all that well. The results weren't that great. When he was with Cody Ceci, who doesn't move the puck all that well, doesn't move all that well, the results weren't great. So if you put Darnell Nurse with a mobile puck-moving defenseman, I think it allows him to just, play a less frantic game is how I would phrase it. That's easier said than done. You're basically trying to find a second version of Evan Bouchard, I suppose, or I guess you could just match Philip Broberg and bring him back. But that's, again, back to the start of this conversation. They need him to bounce back, though. At $9.25 million, it's not even enough for him to be a competent second pairing defenseman. Like, he needs to be a guy who can carry his own pairing and elevate a teammate. So I almost don't even like using the D partner excuse for Darnell Nurse, because it's like, no, when you're paid the amount you are, you should be making the players around you better to some extent. I don't think Cody Ceci is even a third pairing defenseman in today's NHL. So again, like, I feel for Darnell Nurse that he hasn't had a chance to play with a high quality partner. But at the end of the day, man, when you're signing that contract, the expectations are that you're going to be able to carry a blue line, never mind just one pairing. Like, he's paid like he's one of the best defensemen in the NHL, and they haven't gotten that now for basically back-to-back seasons. So does he have it in him to bounce back? I mean, the Oilers certainly need it, especially now considering this Philip Broberg news. But do I think it's going to happen? I honestly don't. I think what we've seen the last 2 years kind of is what Darnell Nurse is, and it's a fringe second pairing defenseman.
Tyler, what's the Oilers' window? Like, what's their window to win a Stanley Cup? Because we'll tell you ours. In Vancouver, we're talking about Quinn Hughes' contract, like the not even the bridge deal, I guess you'd call it, the 7-year deal that he's on. That's the contract. That's the contract that is their window. Like, you have to win before Quinn Hughes is making like $14 million a year. That's the Canucks window. What's the Oilers' window?
I mean, ideally you get something done and you have a banner hanging up, and a Stanley Cup banner at that, I should say, hanging up by the end of McDavid's contract, and that gives you 2 more years because he's going to get a lot more expensive, and then that lines up with Bouchard needing a new deal or will be on a new deal. Draisaitl will already be on his new deal, but I also do think, like, I look at a few things. They'll probably try to get out of, Evander Kane's contract when Matthias Ekholm becomes 36 years old. His $6 million contract comes to an end. Maybe by the time McDavid's contract kicks in, there's something you can do with Darnell Nurse. Like, I really think as long as McDavid and Draisaitl are on the roster and productive, and I think they'll be productive till they're 34, 35 years old. Like, look at what Sidney Crosby's doing, right? Sidney Crosby, if the Penguins would have been a little better last year, I think we could have been talking about a Hart Trophy season for Sidney Crosby. He was that important to that team. But I think McDavid and Draisaitl can be productive till their mid-30s. And as long as you have those two guys, no matter how much you're spending on them, I think you'll have a relatively competitive roster. So I think they need to still, as much as it's like win now, win in the next 2 years, and they have this great opportunity because of the supporting cast with Hyman and Nugent Hopkins and Ekholm still being a really good defenseman, which isn't a guarantee for that many more years considering his age. Like, there's pressure on them to win now, but they also can't like blow off their foot completely and then be sitting like the Pittsburgh Penguins are right now, where you sold all these prospects, you sold all your draft picks, you signed these albatross contracts, and you're sitting there now with this, in the Penguins case, all these Hall of Famers, and you can't even get into the playoffs, never mind be a cup contender. I think the Oilers do need to be a little wary of becoming that. Like, you need to win now. I'm not saying you don't do everything in your power to win now, but you maybe just keep half an eye down the line and go, okay, we do need to be good and we do need to bring in talent 4, 5, 6 years from now. And we need those young pieces because eventually McDavid, Draisaitl, Bouchard, they're going to get more expensive. And the way to combat expensive high-end skilled players is to fill the middle parts of your roster. I wouldn't even say the bottom parts, but the middle parts of your roster with good, cheap talent, which, again, to bring this conversation full circle, that's what stings the most about Holloway and Broberg not being on $1.1 million deals next year, like we had been speculating all along that they would.
Last one for me. I know I said that last time, but I thought of one more. The Ryan McLeod trade was really interesting, bringing Matt Savoie in. What were your thoughts on that trade, and what does Savoie's potential sort of look like for the type of impact he could make next year, the year after, and just how he fits with the Oilers' plans?
Well, hold up. If Dylan Holloway's a St. Louis Blue next year and Evander Kane's on LTIR, there's all of a sudden this little spot in the Oilers' top 9 where Matt Savoie could eventually fit in. But I remember it was whatever, like a Friday. Yeah, it was a Friday afternoon when he got traded because we had the company day in lieu for working on Canada Day and being good workers. And I remember I saw the notification from Friedman and I was like, God, should I go stream? Should I go do a show about this? And I was like, fine, I'll do it. And I'm setting up all my gear here in the basement. I'm like, I can't believe I'm setting up to do a stream for Ryan McLeod for what's going to be like a 3rd round pick. And then Steven Ellis, our prospect guy, texted me and was like, holy shit, you guys might be getting Matt Savoie. That's insane. Like, the return blew me out of the water. I couldn't believe it, man. I thought they were getting a mid-round pick to dump. Like, Ryan McLeod got healthy scratch during their playoff run, and all of a sudden Buffalo's ready to give up one of their best prospects for this guy, a guy Ellis calls one of the best prospects in all of hockey. Like, it was mind-blowing. I couldn't believe they were able to get a player like Savoie. And maybe when you look at that, you do view Dylan Holloway as a bit more expendable, and you say, okay, fine, you and your $2.2 million can go, because for the next 3 years we have Matt Savoie, who they're sending him down to Bakersfield and they say they want to develop him as a center. I think that's the dumbest approach you could take. He's highly skilled and he's a right shot. Play him as a winger and bring him up to play next to either McDavid or Draisaitl, considering how skilled he is, and see if he can be a 35 goal scoring winger for you. Like, the idea of bringing him down to Bakersfield, again, McDavid and Draisaitl should be here for the next 8 to 9, 10 years of their careers to finish out their careers. Why do you want Matt Savoie to be their 3rd line center? Make him a winger. So if I was in charge, he'd be a winger and he'd be up with this team by January or February, and he'd be like a sort of like a Logan Stankoven type ad for the Oilers, what he was for Dallas. That's what I think his fit could be this season. And who knows, if Holloway's not in the picture, maybe his need on the NHL roster comes a little bit sooner than even the Oilers were expecting when they made that trade.
Okay, Tyler, you're in charge. You're dealing with this offer sheet situation. What do you, Tyler, because I know you said what you think is going to happen. What do you, Tyler, do in this situation? How would you handle this one?
I call every GM in the league and offer Cody Ceci for free. And then once that doesn't work, I call every GM in the league and I offer Cody Ceci with a 4th round pick. And if that doesn't work, I probably do a 3rd. And then I would just make that trade. I'd get rid of Cody Ceci. I'd match both of these, and I would go into next season like razor thin to the cap. I'd tell Evander Kane, go to LA, kick your feet up, get surgery, hang out for 6 months, and come be ready for night 1 of the playoffs. And that's the way I'd handle this. Get rid of Ceci. You need to get rid of that contract eventually. Keep your 2 good young players and head into this season with Kane on LTIR.
I'm just imagining now every GM talking to each other, be like, did you get a call from Tyler saying you'll have CC for free? Did you get one saying you'll take him for a 4th? Did you get one saying yeah. Anyways, Tyler, thanks so much for joining us, man. Much appreciated. And we'll talk soon.
See you, boys. Have a good show.
There is Tyler Yaremchuk. You can find his work all over OilersNation.com and, of course, the YouTube channel as well, and on the Daily Faceoff live show daily with Frank Saravelli. Okay, Harm, let's get to our poll question, because the question I just asked Tyler is what we asked the masses. So let's get to our poll question, which is brought to you by our friends over at Bet365. Today we're asking you, how should the Oilers handle the Blues offer sheets to Broberg and Holloway? Broberg, again, 2 years, $4.58 million. Holloway, $2.29 million. We had the options of match both, match Holloway only, match Broberg only, and don't match either player. Right now, 39.3% of voters say match Holloway only, 34.1% say don't match either player, 14.8% say match both players, and 11.8% coming up the rear say match Broberg only. So overwhelming. Philip Broberg's the guy that goes away, but as we've talked about here, if the Oilers lose Philip Broberg, yes, you'd get the 2nd round pick back, but they have to ice a competitive blue line this year, and that really complicates things, because I think when I voted on this poll, I said match Holloway only. I looked at it and said, yeah, Holloway's the better player. I think he's more proven. He's coming in at a lesser cap hit. I think that's what you want to match, and you take the 2nd round pick for Broberg, but there's real question marks about that blue line, especially when you take out Philip Broberg. So it's not as straight and as simple as maybe some people think.
Yeah, I like Tyler's suggestion of trying to shop CC. I've never really been a big Cody CC guy, so if you can get him off the books, then I like the idea of just keeping both guys potentially. But let's say there's a scenario where nobody wants to bite on CC. I lean on matching with Holloway just because I look at his speed, I look at his forechecking ability, his size, and I really think there's a potential for him to grow a lot and become a really productive middle 6 winger, which, yes, the Oilers are deep on the wings right now, but he's also got the more reasonable contract. And then with Broberg, yeah, I understand that he played really well in the Stanley Cup playoffs, but he hadn't even proven himself as an everyday NHL defenseman before the playoffs. So I'd be really hesitant about paying him north of $4.5 million. And I'd almost look at, taking that 2nd round pick and thinking I'll just make that sizable top 4 blue line acquisition at the deadline, especially because the Oilers blue line for October would be shaky without Broberg, but they didn't have Broberg for basically the entire regular season last year too. He didn't play a major role, and ultimately you still got Ekholm and Bouchard as one of the best top pairs in the NHL. You've still got Brett Kulak sort of as a strong anchor where he's better than most 3rd pair defensemen. It's not going to look pretty, but the Oilers are so good up front and just on the power play, special teams as a whole, that I think it's not like they're going to fall out of a playoff position if they ice the blue line without Broberg heading into October.
They did last year. No, I'm just kidding. That was our poll question. It was brought to you by Bet365, a proud partner of Canucks Conversation. Open an account with Bet365 today and bet on a huge range of markets, whatever the sport, whatever the moment. It's never ordinary at Bet365. Be sure to use code VANBONUS when you sign up for an account. Okay, folks, I'm going to tell you now, if you're listening to this, Family Feud Thursdays, the survey is in the description on YouTube, and it's in the description on the podcast as well. So if you're listening, yes, there it is. If you're listening on podcast or you're listening on YouTube, go fill out the survey for Family Feud for Thursday's episode of Family Feud. We need 100 responses, and we're not going to put it out to the people until we get actual listeners and viewers of the show filling out the survey. So if you're on Twitter, head over to YouTube, Find it in the YouTube description. If you're on YouTube, it's in the description. Go fill out the survey. We're looking for retribution, man. Like we're looking for retribution. I also should say this. I golfed with Mr. Chris Faber last week, and we were chatting about the Family Feud segment. He's a big fan of the segment, but that guy, he's no longer part of the show. He still has creative control of the show to some extent because he came up with a suggestion that we're going to use. He said we should keep a tally of how many wins and losses we have, like a win-loss record.
Yeah.
So we're 1-1. We're 1-1 on the season. We're going to keep it going all season. Family Feud Thursdays. Make sure you fill out the survey, and we will play it when we're back at the Wall Center on Thursday. Cowboy B-Borg in the YouTube chat said YouTube gang in all capital letters. So speaking of the YouTube gang and the people that are watching this show live right now, let's get to anyone else, which is brought to you by our friends over at the Vancouver Canadians. The Seas are on the road this week, but return for 6 in a row against Everett next Tuesday at Nat Bailey Stadium. Fireworks extravaganza on Thursday the 22nd, Nooners on Friday the 23rd, a good reason to leave work early on a Friday, and family fun Sunday on the 25th. These games are all sure to be packed, so get your tickets early. Don't wait. Call 604-872-5232 or go to CanadiansBaseball.com. I gotta say, Harm, I did not think I would have the number for the Canadians memorized, but at this point I do. Like if anybody just randomly said, I want to buy Vancouver Canadians tickets, but I don't have Wi-Fi or I don't have data right now, I would be like, okay, go to a payphone, call 604-872-5232 and call them. Like I've memorized the number to call the Canadians for tickets.
I thought out of habit you were also going to add the or go to CanadiansBaseball.com there. But dude,
well, they don't have Wi-Fi.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I was out there last Thursday. It was a lot of fun. Nice sunset, fireworks. It was awesome.
Which prospects caught your eye?
I'd be lying if I knew any of them.
That guy.
They have one guy that
I know who you're about to say. He went
that
off.
Looks like he's. Well, no. There's also one guy in the Canadians that looks like he's 35, and I was like, "There's no way this guy is."
He's the first baseman, right?
Yeah.
He's like 6'7", like 300 pounds, and looks like he's the dad on the team.
You guys are talking about Peyton Williams. That's who I was.
Sure.
Yeah.
Can you get a photo of Peyton Williams? Just go to his minor league baseball page.
I'll get something pulled up quickly here. Yeah.
Pull it up. Yeah. Producer Jacob Lazar. I think I forgot to shout him out at the start. But you're talking about Peyton Williams. That's who I was going to bring up. Peyton Williams got Player of the Week for his performance last week. That's why I said I know you would know him.
They annihilated Eugene. They put up like 15, 16 runs. I don't even remember the exact number. It was a beating.
Yeah, dude, this guy, the guy that Jacob's about to pull up, he's younger than us. That's the crazy thing to think about. This dude's younger than us, and he's hitting absolute bombs out at Nat Bailey. It's amazing. It's amazing.
This reminds me of
he's a huge kid.
This reminds me of the I Am 12 skit we did.
Yeah, from the Benchwarmers, I Am 12. Yeah, he is a big boy. He is a big boy for sure. Shout out Peyton Williams. Shout out to the Vancouver Canadians. Let's get to some anyone else's harm. People in the chat are pointing out that I said find a payphone. There's still payphones, aren't there? Like you can find a payphone. They have them in like Walmarts.
I remember seeing a couple at YVR.
There you go. See, they still exist. Just go to the airport or a Walmart and you can find one. Okay, let's get to some anyone else's here. Yeah, this is the thing. Conversation was wondering what the reason for St. Louis doing this to Edmonton are. I think there were some good theories thrown around. There's obviously the Stan Bowman aspect. As you pointed out, Chicago and St. Louis were rivals. Tyler brought up the Ken Holland thing, which I didn't even think about, but it's an interesting saga to kind of follow, because that's the thing is it's the first punch, right? Like we're only seeing the start of it. And look, it could end with the Oilers just saying, okay, we'll match both. Like, that's fine. And then it could just be over. Or there could be the retribution angle. Again, didn't work out too well for Carolina there, but there's still dominoes that are going to fall, whatever they are.
Well, for St. Louis, the appeal is really that they're in a retool mode, right? They don't want to fully tear it down. They want to build it around that core with Thomas, with Kyrou, with Neighbors. And so the challenge for them is how do they find young players that can be part of the long-term core without giving up the draft picks and young prospects that they themselves need to eventually integrate with the likes of Thomas and Kyrou, right? So if you were to try and acquire young players with upside of Holloway and Broberg's pedigree on the trade market, you're going to have to give up a lot more than the potential compensation involved with these offer sheets. And the strength that St. Louis has right now is with Torrey Krug likely landing on LTIR, they've got cap space. And that's what Armstrong has been really working to try and leverage. You think back a couple trade deadlines ago, and these moves didn't work out, but Armstrong went out, looked at his cap space, and wanted to roll the dice on Kapanen, Jakub Vrana, a couple guys that he thought in their mid-20s could they make an impact. And I'm not really giving up anything assets wise. Ultimately, it didn't work out, but that's kind of the mode that St. Louis is in, where it's how can we take this cap space and translate it into players that can be part of our core. And again, in both the case of Holloway and Broberg, both guys have some upside. I do think there's some downside risk with like if the Oilers let Broberg walk, there's a scenario where that contract may not age well, where maybe he doesn't develop into a top 4 defenseman, but that's kind of the risk the Blues are willing to take because they're in a retool mode.
I still can't believe Evan Bouchard didn't get an offer sheet last year. Like, if you were going to offer sheet anybody on the Oilers, and again, it's a different management group. And we have every reason to believe that this has something to do with Ken Holland not being there and something to do with Stan Bowman being there. Evan Bouchard, they were so vulnerable last year before Evan Bouchard signed what he ended up signing for. They were so vulnerable. And we were talking about it. Like, we were talking about, every team should be offer sheeting Evan Bouchard right now. The Oilers are vulnerable, and nobody did it. So, again, I was very surprised. I was just very surprised to see it this morning. Another thing I saw this morning, we covered it over at Canucks Army. Shout out to Uffe Bowden, my colleague at Better Collective here. He sent me the translated version of this, so I got to put at the bottom of the article because I wrote up the quotes. Allvin did a interview with another Better Collective property, Hockey Sverige in Sweden, and Uffe translated the quotes for me. So at the bottom, usually we have to put all quotes translated by Google Translate, but I wrote in italics, all quotes translated from Swedish by a real Swedish person is what I wrote at the bottom of the article. So these quotes from Allvin, let's dive into them a bit. First off, he talked about the Canucks team success, talked about him winning GM of the year, being the runner-up for GM of the year, what an honor that is, and all that stuff. But he talked about the team, right? He talked about the biggest areas that he needed to fix when he came in, because that was the thing. He got asked about what the most important areas to address were. And I mean, when you look at that, when he first came in, what were the most important areas for him to address? Hell, pick one. There's so many different answers, but the two that he chose to focus on, I found this interesting. This is what he said. There were two things. One was to establish a structure for the organization off the ice, how we would work and what type of players we would bring into the team. The other was also to get coaches in place who could execute the style of play we wanted in both the NHL and the AHL. I think that's such good insight from Allvin Harm, because we just looked at the last regime, right? And for years we knew about the dysfunction within the organization. And the first thing that comes to mind is a very old Patcast episode where Botch and J-Pat are talking about how Jim Benning flew to Utica, stayed for a day, and is like, yep, everything's fine, everything's good, when there was problems with the developmental process and they weren't happy with what was going on in Utica. So Jim Benning flew out there for a day. He's like, yep, all good, all fixed. I was there for a day. We're set. We're all good to go. Now, obviously, it's in Abbotsford. They've got their hands all over the AHL team. They're using it as a developmental tool. It's just, it's such a different vibe around the organization. And again, we talk about this alignment from top to bottom. And that's kind of what Allvin's talking about here.
Yeah, it's also an area that maybe we don't discuss as much, just because a lot of that happens behind the scenes and there isn't as much insight into or transparency into what exactly took place, what changes were actually sort of made internally. Because it's when it comes to pro scouting, for example, it's not just that they've landed on all these free agents. Like, that's the result, that's the outcome, but the process must have also changed for the outcomes to be better, because ultimately it's not just a GM or a president of hockey operations decision to go out and sign a player. It's a collaborative process. You've got to trust your scouts' input, your analytics. How does it all merge together? And the GM is ultimately just the final decision maker, and he's tasked with kind of working his way through the findings of other people in the front office. And so that process leading up to the GM's final decision has to be right for the GM to make decisions that pan out. So, that's super interesting. And then of course, as well, on the coaching side, we've seen just how stark the difference has been in the team's culture, in the team's habits, how they defend when they move from Boudreau to Rick Tocchet.
Yeah, and again, like all that comes down to organizational alignment, right? Like it's not like Travis Green told them not to play defense, right? Like this is the thing that I've been having conversations with about recently with a few different people, is just that like Travis wanted them to play very similar to what Rick Tocchet has them playing at, but everybody saw the writing on the wall. Like you just weren't going to have that without the proper organizational alignment. So it goes so deep. And it was really interesting to hear Allvin talk about that. He had some really good quotes about Daniel and Henrik Sedin, him being welcome in Vancouver, being the first Swedish GM. You can read all these quotes right now. They're on the front page of CanucksArmy.com. If you're listening to this way later, you can click the Canucks News tab on CanucksArmy.com and you'll find this one. The last quote I want to get to, though, is about Jonathan Lekkerimaki. I mean, he also spoke about Nils Aman, but we'll skip over the Nils Aman one. We'll say what he said about Lekkerimaki. He said, "It's going to be exciting. Jonathan was here and showed what he could do in the farm team during the spring. He did very well. I hope he got an understanding of what is required on smaller rinks. It will be interesting to see him at camp when everything kicks off. After that, it's up to him where he will end up, but we are very happy to have Jonathan here and to continue working with him. He's a very talented player. We need to respect his age and experience as well, so there's no rush. When he is physically and mentally ready, Jonathan will show where he wants to be." Allvin also added that he doesn't expect Lekkerimaki to play in Sweden because, of course, the Swedish reporter asked if he'd be back in Sweden, and Allvin said no, he's not going to be back in Sweden. Let's talk about Lekkerimaki as we close out today's Anyone Else Harm. I've been trying to pinpoint, and I mean, we've seen guys like Elias Pettersson, Quinn Hughes, Brock Besser just immediately be ready for the NHL. We've seen that in not so recent, but in recent years, we've seen that. Obviously, it's different with Lekkerimaki, but there's a part of me that's also just wondering, like, can he really not lock down a top 9 spot? Like, can he really not be that dark horse? And I know you guys called him a dark horse when you and Drance wrote about the battles to kind of watch for, and you did seven battles to watch for at training camp. You had Lekkerimaki kind of as a dark horse to fill one of those spots. Like, what's your take on Lekkerimaki? Because I'm curious what he does in training camp, but I also think if he doesn't make the team, which is the most likely outcome, like, let's be clear about that, I'd say there's a chance he could come up and kind of be like a deadline acquisition or like a really late season acquisition to fortify your forward group heading into the playoffs.
Yeah, it's possible that he can, if everything goes right, that he Nils Höglander style in 2021 makes the team out of camp. Just as a surprise, there is an opportunity there on the right side potentially for a top 9 role beyond Besser and Garland. Again, I think the most probable outcome is that he starts in Abbotsford, especially because of how many forwards the Canucks have on one-way contracts that will require waivers if they want to get sent down. But this is where, again, injuries happen over the course of a season. And if Lekkerimaki is ripping it up in the American League, he's absolutely, as you mentioned, an option to potentially come up. And maybe it's just for a little bit of a taste to get an experience just as a litmus test. Sort of like how R.C. Baines got an opportunity for a handful of games around January, February of last year to see, okay, where is this guy at? And obviously Lekkerimaki is a much better prospect. So it's different there, but I am really excited to see how he fares just because he took such a massive step last summer. So are we potentially going to see another massive step when we see him in the fall again? Another point that I just want to make is ultimately I trust this management regime, which wasn't always the case in the past as well when it came to some of these development related decisions, because some of them obviously panned out. But when you also look at Jake Virtanen or Jared McCann, a lot of these guys were probably rushed into the NHL sooner than they were ready. And it had a detrimental impact on, especially I think in McCann's case, of their ultimate standing and the result of what happened with them in the organization.
It's going to be so interesting. And there's, again, we just don't know. We can sit here and speculate in mid-August. We don't know anything until we actually see him at training camp. So I'm hopeful. I love a good rookie makes the team story, especially when they're not competing with Jake Virtanen and Louis Eriksson for a spot, which is how Nils Höglander made the team.
That's
a
a big,
different.
huge asterisk is every time you bring up the Höglander story, you have to be like, yeah, well, his competition was kind of, which is wild to think about, is they come off this bubble run and
that was the top six. That was the top 6 spot.
Wild
Is a good way to describe it. Okay, final thing for me on anyone else, non-hockey related, but it's not baseball related. People will be happy about that. Nathan Rourke is back. Did you see this? Nathan Rourke, the 2022 CFL Most Outstanding Canadian, Nathan Rourke is returning to the BC Lions. Rourke's going to play on Sunday, right? I think they play the Bombers on Sunday.
There's a chance he plays this weekend, but they haven't confirmed it yet.
I hope he does.
Yeah.
And again, I love Vernon Adams Jr., love the Lions, but first of all, this is a great thing because he's going to be like the highest paid player in the CFL. I think I read next 2 years after this one. So shout out again. We shout him out a lot on this show. Amar Doman, man, investing in the team, bringing back Nathan Rourke. I'm kicking myself for not buying a Nathan Rourke jersey when they were like 75% off 2 years ago, because now he's back and he's here for 3 more years. Look, we both went to the 50 Cent concert, the home opener, and it was really boring. It was really boring football. It was 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out. I got into the Lions because of Nathan Rourke. Like, I started watching Lions games and going. I went to like 4 games that summer when he was here, right before he went to the NFL. That guy's phenomenal to watch. He scrambles so well. He's so athletic. It's going to be so much fun to get back out to some Lions games and watch Nathan Rourke compete. I just had to get that in there. I'm so pumped about it.
I have to ask, what does this mean because I don't know much about football at all, NFL or CFL. But for Adams Jr. now, like, how good of a quarterback is he around the CFL? Is he a trade chip now? Like, what happens to him?
So the crazy thing is now the Lions arguably have the 2 best quarterbacks in the CFL on their roster. So they'll finish the season with both. They're hosting the Grey Cup, right? They got to make sure they get in. But like every team in the league will come calling for Vernon Adams Jr. after this season. Like the comparison you could make is like, if the Canucks back when Demko got hurt were like, yeah, well, you know what, let's just add Vasilevsky then. And like brought Vasilevsky in and decided, yep, Demko Vasilevsky for the playoff run. Let's do it. Like, that's what the BC Lions just pulled off here.
I'm so happy he's back. Like, this guy should have got a spot in the NFL. Like, he should have been given an actual opportunity. He played, what did he play? Like 3 preseason games over the past 2 years, and he crushed it in each one. You can't tell me he wouldn't be a good NFL backup, but I'm just happy he's back.
And like there was last year when he was on the Jaguars and Lawrence got hurt for a game and they started CJ Beathard and he was like, maybe he completed 50% of his passes through 2 interceptions and they lost. I'm like, you're telling me that Nathan Rourke couldn't have done better than that? Are you kidding me? Exactly. Yeah, he never really got his shot, which was unfortunate, but good for the Lions.
Good for Nathan Rourke too. I'm happy he's back. Like, I'm happy he's back. He's here for 3 more years. And again, he's going to get paid well. He's getting paid well. He'll be happy about it. And I'm sure he's happy to be back in BC. Obviously would have liked more of an NFL opportunity, but back in BC, Nathan Rourke, QB of your BC Lions. All right. We'll close it out there Bet365 bet of the day. Can you bet on CFL games?
Yes, you can on Bet365. They have CFL lines.
All right. I got to find it. Harmon Stahl.
I'm not as good at this as you are. I wish, you know how there's an option in StreamYard where we could see the Facebook comments. I wish there was an option like that with the YouTube comments. With the YouTube,
yes,
that would be so cool. It'd make anyone else so much easier.
Okay, BC Lions, they're the underdog. Take the Lions to beat the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. When do they play? Saturday? August 19th. Take it right now. Get it while you can before Nathan Rourke is announced as the starter. Lions to beat the Blue Bombers. Big CFL guys on this show. That was our Bet365 bet of the day, and it was brought to you by Bet365. Be sure to use code VANBONUS when you sign up for an account. Must be 19 plus to play. If you choose to play, please play responsibly. Now we will close it out there for my co-host, Harmon Dial. and our technical producer, Jacob Lazar. Our thanks again to Tyler Yaremchuk for joining us. My name is Dave Quadrelli. Thank you so much for listening to their episode of the Canucks Conversation.
Canucks Conversation is live Monday through Friday, every weekday at 2 p.m. over on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. Make sure you like, subscribe, and interact in the YouTube.